Welcome back to HOA Citation Circus. I thought it would be a warning, it was a campaign. I am standing in my driveway with my phone in one hand and a guest pass on a lanyard around my neck. And Janet is 3 feet from me yelling that the tow truck driver does not need my permission because the HOA already authorized it. The wheel lift is halfway deployed under my rear axle, and the driver is inside the cab pulling the lever while I shout for him to stop. Janet steps between me and the truck, clipboard raised like a riot shield, and says if I touch anything she is calling the police for interference. I work 12-hour shifts as a paramedic in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I moved to this community called Magnolia Heights 6 months ago, because the rent was reasonable and the complex looked quiet. The HOA sent a welcome packet with 47 pages of rules, and I skimmed it once, saw the guest parking section, and figured I would be fine because I do not throw parties and my girlfriend visits twice a week. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble was 3 weeks after I moved in. I came home from a night shift at 6 in the morning, parked in my assigned spot, and found a yellow violation sticker on my windshield. No readable text, just a bright neon rectangle with a barcode and a phone number. I peeled it off and called the number, and a recorded message said I had parked in a fire lane and the fine was $200. I walked back outside and looked at the curb. No red paint, no sign, no markings anywhere. I took photos of the entire block, then called the HOA office and left a voicemail. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail with a copy of the violation and a note that said the fine would double if I did not pay within 10 days. The letter was signed by Pamela Reed, compliance officer, but everyone in the neighborhood calls her Janet. I had never met her, but I had heard her name at the mailboxes. People whispered it like a curse. I went to the HOA office on a Saturday morning and asked to see the parking rules. The woman at the desk handed me a binder with plastic sleeves, and I flipped through until I found the fire lane map. The map showed red zones near the clubhouse and the pool, but my street was not on it. I took a photo of the map with my phone and showed it to the desk woman. She frowned and said she would pass it along to management. I asked if I could speak to Janet directly, and the woman said Janet only does field inspections and does not take walk-ins. I left my number and said I wanted the fine reversed. The woman wrote it down and said someone would call me. No one ever did. A week later, my girlfriend parked in the guest lot on a Friday night. She had a guest pass I picked up from the office, and she put it on the dashboard with the date facing up. We went inside, made dinner, watched a movie, and she left around 11. The next morning, I found another yellow sticker on my car, this time in my assigned spot. The violation said unauthorized overnight guest parking. I called the HOA office again and got voicemail. I left a message explaining that my girlfriend was not parked overnight, she left at 11, and the guest pass was valid. No callback. 3 days later I got another letter with a photo attached. The photo showed my girlfriend's car in the guest lot with a timestamp of 11:58 at night. The letter said guest parking is prohibited after 10, and the fine was $150. I checked the rules binder I photographed. The guest parking section said guests may park in designated spaces with a valid pass, and passes are valid for 24 hours. There was no mention of a 10 o'clock cutoff. I sent an email to the management company with copies of the photos and asked them to explain the discrepancy. I got an auto reply that said they would respond within 5 business days. On day 6, I got a form letter that said all parking enforcement is handled by the on-site compliance officer and I should contact her directly. I called the office again and asked for Janet's direct number. The woman at the desk said Janet does not give out her number, but she would pass along my message. I asked when I could expect a call, and the woman said she could not make promises. I hung up and decided to wait. I have been dealing with fragile health for the past year. Nothing life-threatening but enough that sleep disruption makes everything worse, and the stress of back-and-forth paperwork was already wearing on me. I thought if I ignored it, maybe it would go away. That was my second mistake. 2 weeks later, I came home from a shift and found a boot on my front driver's side wheel. Not a sticker, not a warning. a full metal boot clamped to the rim with a chain lock and a tag that said "Contact HOA office for removal." I called the office and got voicemail. I called the emergency maintenance line and got a recording that said parking enforcement is not an emergency. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said if the car is on private property and the HOA has authority under the covenants, there is nothing they can do unless I want to file a civil complaint. I asked what that meant, and she said I would need to talk to a lawyer. I hung up and sat on my front steps staring at the boot. My girlfriend was supposed to visit that night, and I had no way to pick her up from the bus station. I called her and told her to get in rideshare. She asked what was going on, and I said I would explain later. I did not want to say it out loud yet because saying it would make it real. The next morning, I walked to the HOA office and demanded to speak to someone. The same woman was at the desk, and she looked at me like I was a problem she did not want to solve. She said the boot was placed because I had 2 unpaid violations and a 3rd pending review. I said I disputed both violations and never got a hearing. She said the rules allow the compliance officer to take immediate action if a pattern of non-compliance is observed. I asked what pattern, and she said Janet would explain at the next board meeting. I asked when that was, and she said the 2nd Thursday of the month, which was 10 days away. I said I needed my car before then, and she said the boot removal fee was $300 plus the outstanding fines. I did the math in my head. $200 for the first violation, $150 for the second, $300 for the boot. $650 total. I asked if I could pay under protest, and she said I could, but it would not stop the pending review. I asked what the pending review was, and she said Janet would explain at the meeting. I paid the $650 with a credit card and got a receipt with no itemization, just a total and a date. The woman made a call, and 20 minutes later a vendor showed up with a key and removed the boot. He did not say a word to me, just unlocked the clamp, tossed it in the back of his van and drove off. I took photos of the boot, the receipt, and the vendor's license plate. I did not know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew I needed evidence. That night my girlfriend came over and I told her the whole story. She said it sounded illegal and I should call a lawyer. I said I could not afford a lawyer, and she said maybe I could find free legal aid. I looked it up online and found a tenant rights clinic that did phone consultations on Tuesdays. I called on Tuesday and explained the situation to a paralegal. She said it sounded like the HOA was misapplying its own rules, and I should request a copy of the covenants and the enforcement policy in writing. She said if they refused, I could file a complaint with the state, but that could take months. I asked if there was a faster way, and she said I could try going to the board meeting and making my case in person. She said boards hate publicity, and if I brought witnesses or recorded the meeting, they might back down. I thanked her and hung up. I spent the next week preparing. I printed out all the photos, the emails, the receipts, and the rules pages I had photographed. I made a timeline with dates and amounts. I rehearsed what I was going to say. I asked my girlfriend if she would come as a witness, and she said yes. I also reached out to a contractor I met at the gym who lived in the same complex. His name was Marcus, and he had mentioned once that he had issues with the HOA over his work truck. I texted him and asked if he had any documentation, and he said he had photos and timestamps from the day Janet tried to ticket him for parking in a guest spot while he was unloading tools. He said she told him contractors do not count as guests and he needed a special permit, which did not exist in the rules. He said he argued with her and she walked away, but he took photos of the whole interaction including her face and her clipboard. I asked if he would send me the photos, and he said he would do better. He said he would come to the meeting and speak. The board meeting was in the clubhouse at 7. I got there at 6:45 and found a seat in the second row. There were maybe 15 people in the room, most of them older residents who looked like they came to every meeting. Marcus showed up at 6:50 and sat next to me. My girlfriend sat on my other side. At 7, the board president walked in with 3 other board members and Janet. The president was a man in his 60s with a tie and a stack of folders. Janet sat at the end of the table with her clipboard and a handheld license plate scanner on the table in front of her. She looked at me and did not smile. The president called the meeting to order and said they would start with old business. He went through a list of landscaping updates and pool maintenance, then said they would move to new business. He asked if anyone had comments or complaints. I raised my hand. The president pointed at me and said I could speak. I stood up and said my name and my address, and that I wanted to appeal 2 parking violations and a boot fee. Janet leaned forward and said the violations were valid, and the boot was authorized under the enforcement policy. I said I had photos showing there was no fire lane at my location and the guest parking rules do not mention a 10 o'clock cutoff. Janet said the fire lane is defined by county ordinance, not paint, and the cutoff is implied by quiet hours. I asked where quiet hours are defined, and she said it is common sense. The president said he would review my appeal and get back to me. I said I wanted a decision tonight because I already paid under protest and I should not have to wait another month. Janet said I paid because I was guilty, not under protest, and if I keep arguing she would add another violation for disrupting the meeting. I felt my face get hot, but I kept my voice level. I said I have a witness and documentation and I would like to present it. The president said I could submit it in writing. I said I brought it with me. He sighed and said I could have 2 minutes. I walked up to the table and handed him the folder. He flipped through it without reading and said he would review it later. I said the key issue is that the rules are being misapplied, and I wanted clarification on whether the fire lane and guest parking policies are enforceable as written. Janet cut in and said the rules are enforceable as interpreted by the compliance officer, which is her. I said interpreted is not the same as written, and if the rules are unclear, residents should get notice before fines are issued. She said notice was given in the welcome packet, and if I did not read it, that is my problem. I said I did read it, and the packet does not match what she is enforcing. She leaned back and said, I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. A couple people in the audience laughed. I did not. I said I wanted a formal hearing with a neutral arbitrator. The president said the board does not provide arbitration, and if I want to pursue it further I can file a complaint with the management company, or take it to small claims court. He said my 2 minutes were up, and I should sit down. I sat down. Marcus raised his hand. The president sighed again and said yes. Marcus stood up and said he wanted to corroborate my statement. He said Janet tried to fine him for parking in a guest spot while unloading his truck, and when he showed her the rules she said contractors do not count as guests. He said he has photos and timestamps proving Janet was enforcing a rule that does not exist. Janet said contractors are commercial vehicles and are covered under a different section. Marcus said he drives a personal truck with a topper, not a commercial vehicle, and the rules do not distinguish. The president said he would look into it. Marcus said he already looked into it, and he filed a complaint with the management company 3 months ago and never got a response. The president said he could not speak to that. Marcus said maybe someone should speak to it, because it sounds like a pattern. The president said the meeting needed to move on, and Marcus sat down. The president moved to the next agenda item. Janet said she wanted to propose a new enforcement measure. She said guest parking abuse is getting out of hand and she recommended the board authorize a TOW on-site policy for any vehicle without a current decal. The president asked what that meant. Janet said any car in a guest spot without a dated decal would be towed immediately. No warning. One of the other board members asked how guests would get decals. Janet said they could pick them up at the office during business hours, which are 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. Someone in the audience said that is not realistic for people who work, and Janet said guests should plan ahead. Another board member asked what the cost would be. Janet said the HOA has a contract with a tow company, and the fee would be passed to the vehicle owner. She said it would be revenue neutral for the HOA and would deter violations. The president said he would put it to a vote at the next meeting. I raised my hand again. The president said I already spoke. I said this is a new issue. He said I could submit a comment in writing. I said I wanted it on the record that a tow on-site policy without clear notice is predatory, and if the board approves it, I will file a complaint with the city. Janet smiled and said, "I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it." The audience laughed again. The president gavelled the meeting closed. I walked out with Marcus and my girlfriend. Marcus said Janet is untouchable because the board loves her, and the only way to beat her is to get her on tape saying something she cannot walk back. I said I tried that and she is too careful. He said maybe not careful enough. He said he saw her a week ago yelling at a security guard near the clubhouse door because the guard would not let her into the pool area after hours. He said the guard told him later that Janet said she does not follow the same rules as everyone else because she is compliance, and compliance is above the rules. I asked if the guard would testify and Marcus said maybe, but guards do not like to get involved. He said the guard's name was Carl and he works the evening shift on Thursdays. I thanked Marcus and said I would think about it. My girlfriend said she thought the meeting was a waste of time and I should just move. I said I could not afford to break the lease, and besides, I was not going to let Janet win. She said it sounded personal, and I said it was. That night I could not sleep. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, hearing Janet say paperwork and vibes, hearing the audience laugh. I thought about what Marcus said, and I realized he was right. I needed Janet to say something she could not deny, something that proved she was enforcing rules out of personal spite and not policy. I needed a trump card. I did not know what it would be yet, but I knew I had to find it. I let the meeting move on, because my move was not a speech, it was a document. I just needed to figure out what document would flip the whole game. The next week, the HOA sent out a notice that the board had approved the tow on-site policy effective immediately. The notice said all guests must display a current day decal in the windshield, and decals are available at the office during business hours. It said any vehicle without a decal would be towed at the owner's expense, and the tow fee starts at $250. It said the policy was necessary to reduce unauthorized parking and improve community safety. I read the notice 3 times and felt my chest tighten. I called the office and asked if there was a grace period. The woman at the desk said no. I asked if decals could be picked up outside business hours. She said no. I asked what happens if a guest arrives after 5. She said they would need to park on the street. I said the street is public parking. She said the HOA discourages street parking because it looks cluttered. I hung up. 2 days later, my girlfriend visited on a Wednesday evening. She got off work at 6 and took the bus to my place. I picked up a decal from the office at 4:30 and she put it on her dashboard when she arrived. We had dinner and she left at 9. I walked her to her car and saw the decal was still there. She drove off, and I went inside. The next morning I got a text from her with a photo. Her car had been towed from the guest lot at 10:15 the night before. The photo showed a tow receipt with a timestamp and a fee of $275. She said the tow yard told her the decal was not visible because it had flipped over on the dashboard. I called the office and explained what happened. The woman at the desk said if the decal was not visible, the tow was valid. I said the decal was there, it just flipped. She said that is not the HOA's problem. I asked who authorized the tow. She said Janet. I asked if I could appeal. She said I could submit a written appeal, but the fee is non-refundable. I asked why, and she said because the tow company does not issue refunds. I said that is not my fault, and she said I should have made sure the decal was secure. I hung up and called my girlfriend back. She was crying. She said she could not afford the fee, and she did not know how she was going to get her car back. I told her I would pay it. She said I could not keep paying for the HOA's mistakes. I said I did not have a choice. That afternoon I went to the tow yard and paid the fee in cash. The clerk gave me a receipt and said I could pick up the car in the back lot. I walked around the building and found my girlfriend's car parked between 2 trucks with cracked windshields. I unlocked it and saw the decal on the floor mat. It had fallen off the dashboard and slid under the seat. I took a photo of it, then drove the car back to my girlfriend's place and left it in her driveway. She hugged me and said she was sorry. I said it was not her fault. She said she did not want to visit anymore if it was going to cost me money every time. I said I would figure it out. I did not know how yet, but I was not going to let Janet drive her away. If this sounds insane, wait until you hear what happens next. Hit like and subscribe because this gets so much worse. The following week I got a knock on my door at 7 in the morning. I was asleep after a night shift and the knock woke me up. I opened the door and found a man in a polo shirt with a badge that said Parking Compliance Vendor. He said he was there to verify my vehicle registration and decal status. I said I did not have a decal because I park in my assigned spot, not guest parking. He said all vehicles are required to have a decal as of last week. I said that was not in the notice. He said it was in the updated notice sent out 3 days ago. I said I did not get an updated notice. He said that is not his problem, and if I do not have a decal by end of day, my car would be towed. I asked who sent him, and he said the HOA. I asked for his name and company, and he handed me a card with no phone number, just a website. I closed the door and looked up the website. It was a landing page with a logo and a contact form. No address, no staff list, no credentials. I took a photo of the card and the guy's license plate through my window, then called the HOA office. Voicemail. I left a message asking for clarification on the decal policy and said I wanted to speak to Janet directly. No callback. That evening, I went to the office and demanded to see the updated notice. The woman at the desk pulled out a printed sheet and handed it to me. The notice was dated 5 days ago and said all residents must display a registration decal in their vehicle at all times, and decals are available at the office for a fee of $25. I said I never got this notice, and she said it was posted on the community bulletin board and emailed to all residents. I checked my email on my phone and found nothing. I said I did not get the email, and she said that is not her responsibility. I asked why there was a fee for a decal, and she said it covers administrative costs. I said the lease does not mention decal fees, and she said the HOA has the authority to implement fees under the covenants. I said I wanted to see the covenants. She said I could request a copy in writing, and it would take up to 10 business days. I said that is not fast enough, and she said she could not help me. I asked if Janet was available, and she said Janet does not take walk-ins. I asked when I could speak to her, and she said I could submit a request in writing. I left without the decal. The next morning, I found another yellow sticker on my windshield. I peeled it off and saw it was a warning for failure to display a decal. The warning said I had 24 hours to comply, or my vehicle would be towed. I called the office and got voicemail again. I called the management company and got a receptionist who said she would pass my message along. I asked when I could expect a callback, and she said within 3 business days. I said that is longer than the 24-hour deadline, and she said she could not expedite it. I hung up and drove to the office. I walked in and told the woman at the desk I needed a decal immediately. She said the fee is $25. I paid with a credit card and got a decal with a serial number and my license plate printed on it. I asked why it had my plate number, and she said it is for tracking purposes. I asked who tracks it, and she said the compliance vendor. I asked if that was the same guy who came to my door, and she said probably. I stuck the decal on my windshield and left. That night, I got another knock on my door. It was 8, and I was making dinner. I opened the door and found Janet standing on my porch with the same vendor from before. She had her clipboard in one hand and her handheld scanner in the other. She said she was conducting a spot check to verify decal compliance. I said I have a decal, and I showed her my windshield through the window. She walked over and scanned my plate with the handheld device. It beeped. She looked at the screen and said the decal serial number does not match the plate. I said I just got the decal this morning and the woman at the office printed my plate on it. Janet said the system shows a mismatch and that means the decal is invalid. I asked to see the screen. She turned it away and said it is proprietary. I said that is not a real answer. She said if I do not cooperate, she would issue a citation for obstruction. I asked what obstruction, and she said refusing to comply with a compliance check. The vendor stood behind her with his arms crossed, not saying anything. I looked at him and said, "Are you going to let her make up rules?" He shrugged. Janet said, "I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it." I felt my hands shake. I said, "Call whoever you want, I have a decal and I am not paying another fee." She wrote something on her clipboard and said I would receive a notice in the mail. Then she walked off, and the vendor followed her. I closed the door and sat on my couch. My girlfriend called and asked how I was doing. I told her what just happened, and she said Janet was trying to provoke me. She said if I lost my temper, Janet would use it against me. I said I knew that, but it was getting harder to stay calm. She said maybe I should talk to a lawyer for real this time. I said I could not afford it, and she said there had to be free options. I said I already tried legal aid and they told me to go to the meeting, which did nothing. She said maybe I should record the next interaction. I said I tried that at the meeting, and Janet did not care. She said maybe I needed something more direct. Something Janet did not know I had. I said like what? She said I should think about it. We hung up, and I sat in the dark thinking. Then I remembered what Marcus said about the security guard. I texted Marcus and asked if Carl was working tonight. He said yes, and he could introduce me if I wanted. I said I would be there in 10 minutes. I drove to the clubhouse and parked in the back lot. Carl was standing by the side door smoking a cigarette. Marcus was with him. Marcus waved me over and said, "This is the guy I told you about." Carl nodded and said he heard about the meeting. I said I wanted to ask him about Janet. He said he did not want to get involved. I said I understood, but I needed to know if what Marcus told me was true. He took a drag and said it was true. He said Janet came to the pool gate one night after hours and demanded he let her in. He said he told her the pool closes at 9, and she said she does not follow the same rules because she is the compliance officer. He said she told him if he did not open the gate, she would have him fired. He said he did not open it, and she walked off. I asked if he would testify to that. He said no. I asked if he would write it down. He said no. I asked if I could record him saying it. He looked at Marcus, and Marcus said, "It is up to you." Carl dropped his cigarette and crushed it with his boot. He said, "I will say it once and you can record it, but if anyone asks I will deny it." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Carl said his name, the date, and what Janet said. Then he said he was done, and he walked back inside. I thanked Marcus, and he said, "Now you have something." I said I hope so. The next day, I got a notice in the mail. The notice said my decal was invalid due to a system error, and I needed to purchase a replacement decal within 48 hours or face a fine of $100. The notice was signed by Janet. I called the office and asked to speak to the manager. The woman at the desk said the manager only works Tuesdays and Thursdays. I said I needed to resolve this before the deadline. She said I could pay for a replacement decal and the fee is $25. I said I already paid for one yesterday. She said the first one was invalid, so I needed a new one. I said that is not my fault. She said the HOA does not issue refunds for system errors. I hung up and called the management company. I got the same receptionist, and she said my complaint was still pending review. I asked when I would get a response, and she said by the end of the week. I said that is after the deadline. She said she could not expedite it. I hung up and drove to the office. I paid for another decal, stuck it on my windshield next to the first one, and took a photo. I sent the photo to the management company with a subject line that said proof of compliance. No response. That Friday, I came home from a shift and found my car was gone. Not towed. Gone. I walked around the complex looking for it, and I found it in the guest lot with a boot on the front wheel. I called the office and got voicemail. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said if the car was moved without my permission, that is theft, and I could file a report. I said I wanted to file a report. She said an officer would call me back. 2 hours later, an officer called and said he reviewed the situation, and if the HOA has a towing contract and the car was moved within the property, it is a civil matter, not theft. I asked what I was supposed to do. He said I could pay the boot removal fee or take it to court. I hung up and called the office again. This time, Janet answered. She said my car was moved because it was parked in a fire lane. I said I was parked in my assigned spot. She said the spot was reassigned last week due to a layout change, and I was notified by email. I checked my email and found nothing. I said I did not get an email. She said that is not her problem. I asked who authorized moving my car. She said the vendor did. I asked if that was legal. She said it is authorized under the covenants. I said I wanted my car back in my spot and the boot removed. She said I needed to pay the relocation fee of $150 and the boot removal fee of $300. I said that is extortion. She said I could file a complaint if I felt that way. Then she hung up. I sat on the curb and called my girlfriend. She did not pick up. I called Marcus. He answered and said he heard about my car. I asked how he heard. He said Janet was bragging about it in the clubhouse parking lot an hour ago. I asked what she said. He said she told the vendor that she was making an example out of me because I challenged her at the meeting. He said she said it loud enough that other people heard. I asked if he recorded it. He said no, but he could get the names of people who were there. I said I needed more than that. I needed Janet saying it herself. He said, "Good luck with that." I hung up and thought about Carl's recording. It was not enough. I needed something that proved Janet was targeting me personally, not enforcing policy. Then I remembered Janet's voice on the phone just now. She said I could file a complaint. She said that is not her problem. She said the spot was reassigned. I realized every time I called the office the calls might be recorded. I called the office back and got voicemail. The message said, "Your call may be recorded for quality assurance." I smiled. I spent the weekend putting together a plan. I requested copies of all my phone calls to the office under the state public records law. The management company replied and said the calls are not public records because the HOA is a private entity. I replied and said Colorado law requires HOAs to keep records and allow inspection by members. They replied and said I could request an inspection in writing and it would take up to 30 days. I said that is too long, and I needed the recordings immediately to defend against ongoing enforcement. They replied and said they would review my request. I did not hear back. On Monday, I filed a complaint with the City Code Enforcement Office. I said the HOA was misrepresenting fire lane ordinances and using unauthorized towing on public streets. The city replied and said they would send an inspector within 2 weeks. I said I needed it sooner because my car was immobilized. They said they could not expedite without evidence of immediate danger. I sent them photos of the boot and the notices. They said they would review it. On Tuesday, I got a call from the inspector. He said he reviewed my complaint and the photos, and he agreed the HOA's fire lane claims did not match city code. He said the curb where I was cited has no red paint and is not within 50 feet of a hydrant, which means it is not a fire lane under city ordinance. He said the HOA cannot enforce a fire lane that does not exist. I asked if he could put that in writing. He said he would send a letter to the HOA and copy me. I asked when. He said by end of week. I thanked him and hung up. I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Then my phone rang again. It was the management company. The woman on the line said they reviewed my request for call recordings, and the calls are retained for 90 days, but I would need to pay a processing fee of $50 per recording. I asked how many recordings there were. She said at least 12. I did the math. $600. I said that is excessive. She said it is the standard fee. I said I wanted to speak to a manager. She said the manager would call me back. No callback. On Thursday, I got the inspector's letter in the mail. The letter said the HOA's fire lane designations are not consistent with city code, and the HOA must cease enforcement of fire lane violations in areas not marked by the city. The letter said if the HOA continues to enforce invalid fire lanes, the city would assess fines. I made 10 copies of the letter and put one in an envelope addressed to Janet. I drove to the office and handed it to the woman at the desk. She said she would pass it along. I said I wanted confirmation that Janet received it. She said she could not guarantee that. I said I would wait. She sighed and walked to the back. 5 minutes later, Janet came out. She looked at the envelope and said, "What is this?" I said it is from the city. She opened it and read it. Her face did not change. She said, "This does not apply to private property." I said the letter says otherwise. She said the city does not have jurisdiction over HOA enforcement. I said the city has jurisdiction over fire lanes, and the HOA is misrepresenting city code. She said I was misinterpreting the letter. I said I was not, and I had more documentation if she wanted to see it. She said she did not. She said if I keep harassing her, she would file a restraining order. I said documenting violations is not harassment. She said it is if I keep showing up at her office. I said this is the HOA office, not her office. She told the woman at the desk to call security. The woman picked up the phone. I left. That night, I got a text from Marcus. He said Janet had called an emergency board meeting for Friday night, and the agenda was a proposal to ban me from common areas for harassment. I asked how he knew. He said his neighbor is on the board, and she told him. I asked if I could attend. He said it is a closed session, but he would try to record it. I said I needed to be there. He said if I showed up, they would call the cops. I said I would take that risk. He said, "It is your funeral." I showed up at the clubhouse at 7 on Friday. The door was locked. I knocked. A board member opened it and said the meeting is closed. I said I have a right to defend myself. He said the board has a right to executive session. I said this is not an executive session, this is a kangaroo court. He closed the door. I stood outside and called the police. The dispatcher said if the HOA is meeting on private property and I am not a board member, they can exclude me. I said they are voting on a measure that affects me directly. She said that is a civil issue. I hung up and sat on the curb. 20 minutes later, the door opened and Janet walked out. She saw me and smiled. She said, "You are officially banned from the clubhouse, the pool, and the fitness center for 90 days. I said on what grounds? She said harassment and non-compliance. I said I want to see the vote. She said it was unanimous. I said I want to see the minutes. She said minutes will be posted in 30 days. I said that is not good enough. She said, "I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes." Then she walked to her car. I stood up and followed her. She turned around and said, "If you take one more step, I am calling the police." I stopped. She got in her car and drove off. I went home and sat in the dark. My girlfriend called and asked how it went. I told her. She said she was sorry. She said maybe it was time to move. I said I was not moving. She said I was letting this consume me. I said it already had. She said she loved me, but she could not watch me destroy myself over parking spots. I said it was not about parking spots, it was about being targeted. She said she knew, but I had to let it go. I said I could not. She hung up. I did not call her back. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to the state HOA regulatory board. I laid out the timeline, the fees, the notices, the inspector's letter, and the ban. I attached every photo and receipt I had. I said the HOA was operating a predatory enforcement scheme and I requested an audit. I hit send and closed the laptop. Then I remembered the trump card. I still did not have Janet saying it was personal. I had Carl's recording, I had Marcus's witness statement, I had the inspector's letter, but I did not have the one thing that would prove intent. I needed Janet to admit it on the record. I needed to bait her into saying it out loud. I just did not know how yet. The next week, I got a notice that my assigned spot was being reassigned again, this time to a spot at the far end of the lot near the dumpsters. The notice said the change was effective immediately, and if I did not move my car by end of day, it would be towed. I called the office and got voicemail. I drove to my new spot and found it was half the size of my old spot and next to a dumpster that smelled like rot. I took photos and sent them to the management company with a complaint. No response. That afternoon I came home and found a yellow sticker on my windshield. The violation said I was parked over the line. I measured the space with a tape measure. The spot was 7 feet wide and my car was 6.5 feet wide. There was no way I was over the line unless the line was painted wrong. I took photos of the measurements and sent them to the management company. No response. I also sent them to the inspector. He replied and said spot dimensions are not under city jurisdiction. I replied and said the HOA is fabricating violations. He said he could not help with that. I was on my own. On Wednesday, my girlfriend came to visit. She parked on the street because she did not trust the guest lot anymore. We had dinner, and at 9:30 we heard a loud beeping outside. I looked out the window and saw a tow truck backing into my driveway. I ran outside, and Janet was standing next to the truck with her clipboard. The driver was in the cab pulling the wheel lift lever. I shouted for him to stop. Janet stepped between me and the truck and said the tow was authorized because my car was illegally parked. I said I was in my assigned spot. She said the spot was reassigned, and I did not move my car to the new spot. I said I did move it. She said not according to her records. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos with timestamps. She said photos do not count. I said they are proof. She said, I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. The driver kept pulling the lever. I shouted at him to stop. He did not. The wheel lift arms locked under my rear axle and started lifting. I stepped toward the truck, and Janet grabbed my arm. She said if I touched the truck she would have me arrested. I pulled my arm away and said this is theft. She said it is enforcement. My girlfriend came outside and started filming on her phone. Janet saw her and said recording is not allowed on HOA property. My girlfriend said the driveway is not HOA property, it is a private easement. Janet said she did not care. She told the driver to finish. The wheel lift pulled my car halfway off the ground. I felt my chest tighten. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I hit record and put it in my pocket. Then I said to Janet, "Why are you doing this?" She said, "Because you challenged me." I said that is not a valid reason. She said it is personal, and I want to make an example of you. I said, "Say that again." She said, "I do not need to repeat myself." I said, "You just admitted this is personal and not about policy." She said, "So what?" I said, "You just gave me everything I need." She looked confused. Then she looked at my pocket and saw the red light on my phone through the fabric. Her face changed. She said, "You are recording me." I said yes. She said that is illegal. I said Colorado is a one-party consent state. She lunged for my pocket. I stepped back. The driver stopped the lift and got out of the cab. He said, "I am not getting involved in this." Janet said, "You need to finish." He said, "I do not tow under duress." He got back in the cab and lowered my car. Then he unhooked the lift and drove off. Janet stood there with her clipboard shaking. She said, "This is not over." I said, "Yes, it is." The next morning I filed a formal complaint with the management company and attached the audio recording. I also sent it to the state regulatory board and the inspector. The management company replied within an hour and said they were launching an internal investigation. The state board replied and said they would review it. The inspector replied and said, This changes everything. He said the HOA was using unauthorized enforcement on private property, and the city could issue a cease and desist order if the board did not comply with the fire lane ruling. He said he would send another letter to the board with a copy to me. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Marcus and told him what happened. He said, "You finally got her." I said, "I hope so." He said, "What are you going to do now?" I said, "I am going to the next board meeting, and I am playing the recording." The board meeting was 2 weeks later. I showed up early with Marcus and my girlfriend. The room was packed. Word had spread, and half the complex was there. Janet was already at the table with her clipboard and scanner. She did not look at me. The president called the meeting to order and said they would start with public comments. I raised my hand. He called on me. I stood up and said I wanted to present new evidence regarding HOA enforcement practices. Janet said, "You are banned from speaking." I said, "The ban does not apply to board meetings." The president said he would allow it. I walked up to the front and plugged my phone into the portable speaker Marcus brought. I said, "This recording was made last week during an attempted tow of my vehicle." I hit play. The recording played. My voice asking why she was doing this. Janet's voice saying it is personal and she wants to make an example of me. The room went silent. When it finished, I unplugged my phone and said, "This is proof that the compliance officer is using enforcement as retaliation, not policy." I also have documentation from the city inspector confirming that the HOA has been misrepresenting fire lane ordinances in writing, and the city has ordered the HOA to cease enforcement or face fines. I handed the president copies of the inspector's letters and the audio transcript. I said, "I am requesting a full refund of all fees paid under false pretenses, a formal apology, and the immediate removal of the compliance officer." The president looked at Janet. Janet looked at her clipboard. The president said he would need to consult with legal counsel. I said, "That is fine, but the recording speaks for itself." One of the other board members said, "We need to vote on this." Another board member said, "We need to suspend enforcement until we sort this out." The president said, "I agree." He called for a motion to suspend all parking enforcement pending review. The motion passed 4-1. Janet was the only no vote. The president said the meeting was adjourned. Janet stood up and walked out without saying a word. 3 days later, I got a letter from the management company. The letter said the HOA board had voted to terminate the parking enforcement contract with the compliance vendor, effective immediately. The letter said all outstanding fines issued by Janet would be reviewed, and refunds would be issued where appropriate. The letter said Janet had resigned from the board. The letter said the HOA would pay my filing fees to end the fight, and they were implementing new policies to prevent future retaliation. I read the letter twice and felt something loosen in my chest. I called my girlfriend and read it to her. She said, "You did it." I said, "We did it." She said, "Does this mean it is over?" I said, "I think so." She said, "Good, because I was starting to think you were going to live in that parking lot forever." I laughed for the first time in weeks. I called Marcus and told him. He said, "Janet got exactly what she deserved." I said, "I just wish it did not take this long." He said, "Some fights are worth it." I agreed. The refund check arrived a week later. It covered all the fines, the boot fees, the decal fees, and the tow yard fee for my girlfriend's car. I deposited it and took my girlfriend out to dinner. We sat outside at a place downtown, and she said, "So what now?" I said, "Now I just live here like a normal person." She said, "You think the new board will be any better?" I said, "I do not know, but at least they know people are watching." She raised her glass and said, "To surviving the HOA." I clinked my glass against hers and said, "To never doing this again." She laughed and said, "I will drink to that." The next board meeting was quiet. The new compliance officer introduced himself and said enforcement would be limited to clear violations with photographic evidence and written notice. He said there would be no more surprise tows, no more boots, and no more vendor ambushes. He said the board was reviewing the parking rules to make them clearer and more realistic. I sat in the back and listened. When the meeting ended, a few neighbors came up and thanked me. One woman said Janet had been targeting her for months over her contractor's truck, and she was relieved it was over. A man said he got fined 3 times for guest parking and could never get anyone to explain why. He said he was going to request a refund. I gave him a copy of the inspector's letter and said, "Show them this." He thanked me and walked off. Marcus patted me on the back and said, "You started something." I said, "I just wanted my car back." He said, "Yeah, but now everyone else gets their cars back too." That night I sat on my porch and looked at the parking lot. My car was in my original assigned spot, the one I had when I moved in. The decal was still on my windshield, but I did not care anymore. The lot was quiet. No tow trucks, no vendors, no Janet with her clipboard and scanner. I thought about calling my girlfriend, but she was asleep. I thought about calling my mom and telling her the whole story, but I was too tired. I just sat there and breathed. The air smelled like rain, and the streetlights made the puddles glow orange. I thought about how close I came to giving up, how many times I almost walked away, and how the only reason I did not was because I knew if I let Janet win, she would do it to someone else. I thought about Carl and Marcus and my girlfriend, and everyone who helped me when they did not have to. I thought about the inspector who actually read my complaint and did his job. I thought about the board members who voted to suspend enforcement even though it made them look bad. I thought about all the small moments that added up to this one big moment, and I realized I was not angry anymore. I was just tired, and relieved, and ready to move on. The next morning, I got a text from my girlfriend. She said she was coming over after work and she wanted to cook dinner. I said that sounded perfect. She said, "No more HOA drama, right?" I said, "No more HOA drama." She sent a heart emoji, and I sent one back. I put my phone down and got ready for my shift. The sun was coming up, and the parking lot was empty except for my car and a couple others. No yellow stickers, no boots, no vendors. Just cars in spots, the way it was supposed to be. I got in my car and drove to work, and for the first time in months, I did not look in the rearview mirror to see if anyone was following me. I just drove. And it felt good. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.